Well, hello again. I asked Angie just an hour ago or so, do you think I need a shave and clean myself up a bit? She said, no, you'll be fine. I said, I'm doing a YouTube. Oh, yes, she said. So I've had a shave, and hopefully that's me out of trouble at least for until lunchtime. Anyway, worry, worry, worry. We seem to worry so much about so much. Indeed, in this country, and please don't think this is any kind of political statement or view, it's just a tongue in cheek little illustration to open up this short message. For years here in Britain, quite literally, we had been worrying about this Brexit. Should we do it? Can we do it? Will we be okay? Do you think we'll survive? Well, I'm going to tell you. I've come to the conclusion during these days of lockdown that I think we'll be fine, and here is why. All around about me, I'm sure you'll have been the same, all around about me, I hear all kinds of noises going on in people's gardens and things like this that I haven't heard before. Power tools going on. I think we have found that we have a nation full of stonemasons, carpenters, landscape gardeners, walking around the supermarkets. Look at the shelves that are laid empty. Turns out we have a lot of Michelin star chefs, perhaps master bakers going on all around us. So, as Brexit goes, can we survive? Will we do it? I think we'll be fine. We'll be okay. Panic is over. But there is a point in there somewhere. The lockdown does give us some time to reflect. Society, the church in general, people all across the place, we seem to have forgotten the simple ways of life, the talents that we have as life became easier, everything was put on a plate for us, and we could buy things, throw them away. And you know how society and the world has indeed been going. We need to get back to realizing the talents and abilities that God Himself has given to each of us, the source of that ability, and the provisions that He brings to us. You know, in the biblical days, if you make your way through the Old Testament, certainly, you find that God gave people everything, the talents that they had, the things that you see that they accomplished, the things they could build and make. They were very gifted, very talented people, and of course, there was no end to the provision that He gave them and the guidelines, the Ten Commandments, and all the instructions He gave them to have a life of peace and love with one another and indeed with God Himself. It should have been great. It should have been tremendous. But we know that it didn't always, and certainly not for very long, work out that way. What did they do with these things? Always looking for something different, always looking for something better, always looking to make it easier, the easy life. They always seemed to find themselves in a point where they felt there was no way back. They saw there was no hope as they got themselves into the next mess that they had created in society and the world around about them. But we read in the New Testament, we make our way through the Gospels, of course, and in the letters, and we read of something different. What do we see? God again took action, as He always has done, on behalf of His people. It's an act of pure love on His behalf. All that He does is for we, His children. In Romans chapter 5, the Apostle Paul says it was at just the right time, while we were still powerless, that Christ died for us. At just the right time. People were not free, they were captive. Again, this time, of course, to their Roman conquerors. They had wandered so far from God and His ways, His power, His provisions, His ability and perfection, and people simply were not free. All the world, the political makeup or circumstances, the religious makeup or circumstances were just perfect for God's movement. People were desperate. They were desperate for help. They were looking for help. They were looking for something new. And Jesus, of course, came from His throne in eternity and the glory of heaven to come here to be with us and to face, well, everything that we know he faced, all the darkness and the treachery of humanity, the deceptions and the lies and the gossip and, well, everything that went with it. But I want to share some thoughts with you here. If you were to go further on into the New Testament, you come to a book called the Hebrews. The Hebrews in the New Testament. It has some strange and difficult old or ancient language written in their culture and for the Hebrews, the Jews of the day. It can be confusing. If we read from chapter 8 through chapter 10, we see in amongst that language a whole load of good news about Jesus and what he actually did achieve. Talks about the ceremonies and the sacrifices, the religious setups, the religious ways that man had created for themselves. It tells us how God actually felt about it. It talks a lot of how he was displeased about it because it replaced real faith. It replaced a relationship between we and God as a people, as individuals, as it replaced real good, loving, proper relationships between people themselves. These chapters tell about how God replaced them all with one sacrifice, just one sacrifice, no repeating it over and over in all the ceremonies that went with it. Let me read some from Hebrews chapter 9, and I'm going to go from verse 11 through to verse 15 here. It says, "But when Christ came as high priest of the good things that are now already here, things that God had put in place, we had tweaked about with, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, replacing the old tabernacle that had been built by the hands of man under the instruction of God, of course. He went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands. That is to say, it is not part of this creation. It is in heaven. It is eternal. It is divine and perfect. It's a perfect place to enter into a relationship with God himself. It says, he did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves ceremonies. He entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. The blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God. For this reason, Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, now that he has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. That is the first deal in our simple language, the first bond or agreement made between man and God, and then we took it and the rules and the laws and tweaked them about to suit ourselves, and they became impossible to keep us clean in our heart, our conscience, and our relationship, of course, with our God. A clear conscience, away from the ceremonies and the sacrifices the writer of the Hebrews talks about here. In chapter 10, we then go on and read, the law, the old way, is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly over and over, make perfect those who draw near to worship. Otherwise, we would not have stopped being offered, for the worshippers would have been cleansed once and for all, and would no longer have felt guilty of their sins. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Therefore, When Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. Then I said, here I am. I have come to do your will, my God. Christ came to be that one sacrifice, to open up that way past the earthly places into the true place of worship, the place in the heart of God, into the presence of God in a very real way. There's a wonderful few verses in chapter 8 of Hebrews. Here, this sums it up, if you like, rounds things off. We go from verse 6 through to verse 8, somewhere midway through that verse in verse 8. It says, but in fact, the ministry Jesus had received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is mediator is superior to the old one, since the new covenant is established on better promises. Now, I'm going to pause there for a second. That was verse 6. Be easy then to say, but we are not saying that there was a problem with the old covenant as God had created it. There was no problem with God's former promises, God's proper former provisions, God's former guidelines and instructions. No problem. God worked in his perfect love and his perfect grace for his people. It says in verse 7, for if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, and there wasn't in the covenant, no place would have been sought for another, the second covenant, the new covenant, Jesus. Verse 8 says, but God found fault with the people and said, the days are coming, that declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant. God gave us those wonderful guidelines, instructions, the 10 Commandments. Imagine if the world was to live by them as great principles, as they stand, as they are. How different would the world be? Would they have constantly have fallen in and out of exile, captivity, favour with God, guilt in their conscience? Would we find ourselves in the problems we found in the modern world, with the world wars and the terrible situation that we find ourselves in now? I believe wholeheartedly, no, we would not have, if we would stop wandering away from our God. Hebrews chapter 10 says, in verse 19 through to 24, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, we have confidence because we are cleansed and in a proper relationship with the loving, gentle, gracious God through that sacrifice, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain that is his body, which he gave on the cross. And since we have a great high priest over the house of God, not the manly priests constantly going through the ceremonies to provide a momentary cleansing for us, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. For he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Imagine if we were to take that thought, take that way of life, a way of life, make it how we live, with the 10 Commandments and those great principles. Imagine your life, imagine our society, imagine how different the world could be. Through Jesus, a one-time sacrifice, entering into the holiest of places. Our churches are wonderful places, running properly in a proper relationship, worship filled and filled with praise and adoration to God. But entering into the holiest of places, all the abundance and power, the love and the mercy, a relationship with God, a way of life, how we actually live. Hold unswervingly. Let no one convince you any different. Let not Satan in our doubts and in different options and ways to go, easier ways of life, make more money. Let it not infect us again. Hold unswervingly to the truths of the way God, the Creator, the ultimate all-knowing God, filled with perfect love, grace and mercy for everybody equally. Let us hold unswervingly to that. Let me close with this. In chapter 11 of Hebrews, it's called, we think of it as the heroes of the faith. There's a whole list of great heroes of the scriptures in it. It begins like this. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. What we hope for, a better way, of simpler, easier, a more equal and loving way of life. We do not see in our eyes, or physically see the glory of God, although we see him, sense him all around us. But it is the confidence of that hope that we walk with. And remaining in chapter 11, we move down, verse 6. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe unswervingly, must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him, living that way of life, not through a ceremony and a church attendance once a week, once a month, here and there occasionally, but unswervingly, earnestly seeking him day and day and day in our lives. In verse 7, it says, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and their ways, the way they were behaving and ignoring the call of God at that time, and became an heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. The rightness with God that is in keeping with unswerving faith. We have a new covenant. It's far superior because it doesn't rely on our man-made ways, our thinking and logic, how we can make the next thing easier a little bit. It relies upon Jesus, the great and one and only sacrifice, the perfect love of God given for you to give you a better, a much far superior, much better way of life for you, for me, for us, for the world.